The lights do not flicker first. There is no dramatic explosion on the horizon, no cinematic surge rolling across the skyline. The power simply stops. Air conditioners fall silent mid-cycle. Elevators freeze between floors. Data centers drop offline in less than a heartbeat. Across entire regions, transformers saturate, protective relays trip, and transmission lines go dark. Within seconds, millions of people move from a fully powered civilization into a grid-down reality they have never rehearsed. This is not speculation. It is physics, and if you are waiting for an official countdown before it happens, you will be too late. An electromagnetic pulse, whether generated by a high-altitude nuclear detonation or an extreme solar geomagnetic disturbance, does not destroy civilization through fire. It disables it through induction. When intense electromagnetic energy couples into long conductors, such as transmission lines, pipelines, and communication cables, it creates high-voltage surges far beyond design tolerances. The most vulnerable components are not your phone or your flashlight. They are the extra high-voltage transformers that form the backbone of the grid. These units weigh hundreds of tons, are custom, built, and require months or years to replace. If enough of them fail simultaneously, the grid does not simply reboot. It fragments. The misunderstanding begins with scale. Many assume an EMP event would behave like a localized lightning strike or a brief outage resolved by utility crews within hours. Lightning protection systems and surge suppressors are designed for fast, high-frequency spikes. A geomagnetic disturbance operates differently. It induces quasi-direct currents into transmission lines that slowly drive transformer cores into saturation. When a transformer saturates, it overheats, produces harmonic distortion, and can suffer permanent winding damage. The damage may not be explosive, but it is cumulative and catastrophic. The hidden science lies in how the grid was engineered for efficiency, not resilience against continent-scale induced currents. Evidence for this vulnerability is not hypothetical. In 1989, a geomagnetic storm collapsed the Hydro-Quebec grid in under 2 minutes, leaving millions without power for 9 hours. That event was far weaker than the 1859 Carrington event, which induced currents strong enough to set telegraph lines on fire. Modern grids are far more interconnected and far more dependent on sensitive control electronics. Studies by the Electric Power Research Institute and national laboratories have repeatedly modeled transformer vulnerability under geomagnetically induced current loads. Replacement timelines for critical transformers can exceed 12 months under normal supply conditions. During a global event, supply chains would not be normal. The survival implications are immediate and systemic. Power loss cascades into water treatment failure within hours because pumps require electricity. Without pumping, municipal water pressure drops. Without pressure, contamination risk increases. Wastewater systems back up. Fuel stations cannot pump gasoline. Telecommunications towers rely on battery backups that last hours, not weeks. Hospitals switch to generators, but generators require diesel, and diesel deliveries depend on functioning logistics networks. Refrigeration fails, leading to food spoilage across urban centers within days. What begins as an electrical anomaly becomes a supply chain fracture. Escalation is not measured in explosions but in time without restoration. Day 1 is confusion. Day 3 is scarcity. Day 7 is systemic stress. The transition from inconvenience to survival scenario is defined by resource depletion rates. Urban environments operate on just-in-time inventory systems. Grocery stores carry only a few days' worth of food. Distribution centers rely on synchronized routing software and powered loading systems. Remove grid power and you remove coordination. Even if trucks are functional, dispatch networks may not be. The secret grid-down survival plan is not hidden because of malice. It is overlooked because it requires confronting uncomfortable dependencies. The first principle is that survival during prolonged grid failure is an engineering problem, not a camping trip. Most preparedness advice focuses on short-term disruptions. A true grid-down scenario requires redundancy across power, water, food, communication, and medical capacity for an extended period. The science of resilience begins with load analysis. You must calculate the minimum electrical load required to sustain life, supporting systems in your environment. That includes water pumping, refrigeration for critical medications, and communication equipment. The danger intensifies when we examine personal electronics. Many believe that small devices will automatically fail during an EMP event. In reality, the most severe threat to small electronics comes from their connection to long conductors. A device unplugged and isolated is far less vulnerable than one connected to the grid. The hidden science involves antenna length. The longer the conductor, the greater the induced voltage. Household wiring acts as an unintended antenna. Transmission lines act as massive collection systems. Understanding this clarifies priorities. Protecting a backup radio in a shielded container is useful. Protecting your access to water is critical. Evidence from electromagnetic compatibility testing shows that simple conductive enclosures, properly sealed, can significantly attenuate high-frequency electromagnetic energy. A Faraday enclosure does not need to be complex, but it must maintain continuous conductive integrity. Gaps, seams, and poor grounding reduce effectiveness. However, shielding electronics addresses only communication and information retention. It does not restore infrastructure. Survival implications therefore shift toward decentralized capability. If centralized systems fail, localized systems must take over. Water becomes the first true battleground of grid-down survival. Municipal water relies on electrically powered pumps to move and pressurize water across elevation gradients. Gravity-fed systems exist but are limited. Once pressure falls below threshold, boil water advisories become irrelevant because boiling requires fuel and fuel requires distribution. The hidden science here is biological contamination kinetics. Pathogens such as E. coli, Giardia, and Cryptosporidium proliferate rapidly in untreated water. Dehydration impairs cognition within hours and organ function within days. A human can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. The evidence supporting decentralized water resilience is straightforward. Mechanical hand pumps, gravity-fed filtration systems, ceramic filters, and solar stills operate without grid dependency. Reverse osmosis systems require power, but can be paired with off-grid energy sources. Rainwater harvesting, when properly filtered and stored, provides redundancy. The survival implication is clear. Without independent water purification capability, grid-down survival time shrinks dramatically. Escalation continues into food preservation. Refrigeration is not merely a convenience. It prevents bacterial growth in perishable goods. When refrigeration stops, internal refrigerator temperatures rise above safe thresholds within hours. The misunderstanding lies in assuming that canned food alone ensures long-term survival. Caloric sufficiency does not equal nutritional adequacy. Micronutrient deficiencies impair immune function over time. Hidden science reveals that freeze-dried foods retain nutrients better over long storage durations compared to high-heat-processed foods. Proper storage temperature and humidity control extend shelf life significantly. Evidence from disaster recovery zones shows that communities with diversified food storage and localized production recover faster. Home gardens, seed storage, and knowledge of crop rotation increase resilience. However, agriculture without irrigation may fail in drought conditions. The survival implication is that food planning must integrate water planning. Everything connects. Communication blackout compounds isolation. Modern emergency alerts rely on powered infrastructure. Battery-powered radios become lifelines for information, but only if broadcasting stations remain operational. Amateur radio networks have historically provided decentralized communication during disasters. The hidden science involves ionospheric propagation, which can be affected by solar events. Understanding frequency bands and antenna configurations increases communication reliability when infrastructure is compromised. Evidence from hurricanes and earthquakes consistently shows that communication restoration lags behind power restoration. In a wide-area EMP or severe geomagnetic event, restoration may be regionally staggered. Survival implications include the need for pre-established contact plans and rendezvous protocols. Without communication, coordination fails. As systems degrade, social stability becomes an emergent variable. The danger is not inherent human behavior but resource scarcity. Studies in disaster sociology indicate that cooperative behavior is common initially. However, prolonged scarcity shifts dynamics. The hidden science lies in stress physiology. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, impairs judgment, and increases conflict probability. Survival planning must therefore account not only for material needs but for psychological resilience. Evidence from extended blackouts, such as the 2003 Northeast blackout, demonstrates that even short-term outages strain emergency services. That event lasted days, not months. Scaling duration scales consequence. Survival implications demand layered redundancy: energy, water, food, communication, security, medical supplies. Escalation returns us to power. Small-scale renewable systems, such as solar photovoltaic arrays paired with battery storage, provide partial autonomy. The misunderstanding is assuming that grid-tied solar automatically works during blackout. Most grid-tied inverters shut down to prevent backfeeding into dead lines. Off-grid or hybrid systems with islanding capability are required for independent operation. The hidden science involves inverter design and battery chemistry. Lithium iron phosphate batteries offer thermal stability advantages compared to other chemistries. Charge controllers regulate voltage to prevent damage. Evidence from remote installations shows that modest solar arrays can sustain refrigeration, communication devices, and limited lighting when properly sized. Load prioritization is critical. Survival implications are clear. Without energy management, stored power depletes rapidly. The scenario intensifies when we consider cascading infrastructure interdependence. Fuel refineries require electricity. Pipelines rely on electrically powered pumps. Without fuel, backup generators eventually stop. Without generators, hospitals fail. Without hospitals, mortality increases from otherwise treatable conditions. The transition from infrastructure failure to public health crisis can occur within weeks. The final warning is not theatrical. It is mathematical. Infrastructure systems are optimized for efficiency and cost reduction, not prolonged isolation. The more interconnected the system, the greater the potential for cascading failure under extreme electromagnetic disturbance. Preparedness is not about expecting apocalypse. It is about recognizing systemic fragility and engineering personal resilience. As we move deeper into the mechanics of grid collapse, we must examine transformer recovery logistics, black start procedures, and the real timeline for re-energizing a dark grid. Because once the lights go out across an entire region, restarting them is not as simple as flipping a switch. The science of restoration determines how long you must survive independently, and that timeline may be far longer than most are prepared to endure. Black start capability is the thin line between a temporary outage and a prolonged societal fracture. When a grid collapses across a wide region, it cannot simply be re-energized from nothing. Large power plants, particularly nuclear and coal facilities, require external power to initiate startup sequences. Pumps must circulate coolant, control systems must initialize, and turbines must be brought to operational speed under carefully regulated conditions. In a functioning grid, that startup power comes from the network itself. In a full grid down scenario, that external reference disappears. Restoration must begin with smaller generation sources capable of self-starting, typically hydroelectric facilities or specific gas turbines designed for black start operations. The danger is that black start resources are limited and geographically fixed. If transmission corridors between them and critical substations are damaged, synchronization becomes complex. The analysis reveals that grid restoration is a staged process. First, isolated generation sources start independently. Then operators energize small sections of transmission lines, carefully balancing load and frequency. Voltage must be stabilized before additional segments are brought online. If load exceeds generation at any step, frequency drops and protective relays trip, collapsing the island that was just formed. This process can take hours for small regions under normal circumstances. Under widespread transformer damage, it could take weeks or longer. The misunderstanding lies in assuming that utilities maintain massive reserves of spare transformers and switchgear ready for rapid deployment. In reality, extra high voltage transformers are custom engineered for specific substations. Transportation alone can require specialized rail systems and heavy haul vehicles. Manufacturing lead times extend into months during stable global conditions. The hidden science centers on magnetic core saturation and insulation breakdown. When transformers experience geomagnetically induced currents, half-cycle saturation produces excessive reactive power demand. This generates heat in windings and structural components. Insulation degradation is not always immediately visible. A transformer may appear functional, only to fail days later under load. Evidence from post-disturbance forensic analysis has shown localized melting and mechanical deformation within windings after severe geomagnetic events. The survival implication is stark. Even if some power returns quickly, secondary failures may follow, creating rolling instability. Escalation extends beyond the power grid into digital infrastructure. Modern substations rely on supervisory control and data acquisition systems. These systems depend on communication networks and timing signals, often synchronized via GPS. Severe solar activity can disrupt satellite signals, introducing timing errors. Without accurate phase synchronization, reconnecting grid segments risks destructive out-of-phase closure, which can damage generators and transformers instantly. The transition from localized outage to prolonged blackout is therefore not only mechanical but informational. As restoration slows, urban density becomes a multiplier of stress. High-rise buildings rely on electric pumps to deliver water to upper floors. Without power, gravity alone cannot maintain pressure beyond a few stories. Residents may be forced to descend multiple flights to access limited water supplies. Elevators remain non-functional. Fire suppression systems that depend on pressurized pumps weaken. The misunderstanding is assuming that municipal authorities can deploy mobile generators to sustain entire districts. Mobile generation capacity is limited and prioritized for hospitals and critical infrastructure. Residential areas receive minimal support. Hidden within emergency management doctrine is the concept of critical load prioritization. During resource scarcity, operators allocate power to facilities with the highest life safety impact. This means that residential refrigeration and comfort are secondary to wastewater treatment plants and emergency operations centers. Evidence from large-scale disaster response consistently demonstrates that power restoration follows a triage model. Survival implications demand personal autonomy. Waiting for restoration without redundancy compresses your margin of safety. Escalation continues into sanitation. Wastewater systems rely on electrically powered lift stations to move sewage through pipelines when gravity flow is insufficient. When these stations fail, sewage backs up into residential areas or overflows into waterways. This creates secondary health hazards, including pathogen exposure and vector proliferation. The hidden science lies in microbial growth dynamics in stagnant waste systems. Without flow and treatment chemicals, bacterial populations increase exponentially. Evidence from post-hurricane environments shows spikes in gastrointestinal illness following prolonged sanitation disruption. The survival implication is that hygiene planning must include waste management solutions independent of municipal systems. Transitioning to energy at the household level, fuel storage becomes critical. Gasoline degrades through oxidation and evaporation, forming gums that impair engine function. Stabilizers can slow this process, but not indefinitely. Diesel offers longer storage life, but is vulnerable to microbial contamination in the presence of water. The misunderstanding is storing fuel without rotation or filtration. Hidden science reveals that microbial growth in diesel tanks produces biomass that clogs filters and corrodes tanks. Evidence from maritime and agricultural sectors confirms that untreated long-term diesel storage leads to engine failure. Survival implications require not only storage but maintenance protocols. Escalation enters the realm of medical continuity. Many chronic conditions depend on electrically powered devices, from oxygen concentrators to refrigerated insulin. Backup generators provide temporary relief but require consistent fuel. Battery backups offer limited runtime. The hidden science involves cold chain stability for medications. Insulin potency decreases when stored outside recommended temperature ranges. Evidence from pharmaceutical stability studies shows measurable degradation after sustained exposure above 30 degrees Celsius. In a prolonged blackout during summer, temperature control becomes life-critical. Survival implications demand alternative cooling strategies, including insulated containers, evaporative cooling methods, or solar-powered refrigeration. As grid failure persists, economic functions stall. Electronic payment systems rely on powered networks and banking servers. Without connectivity, transactions revert to cash, which quickly becomes scarce. Supply chain actors unable to process payments reduce distribution. The misunderstanding is assuming physical inventory guarantees availability. Distribution requires coordination, fuel, and financial processing. Hidden science in logistics modeling shows that disruption at a single hub can ripple across entire networks within days. Evidence from pandemic-era shortages demonstrates how quickly shelves empty when restocking lags. Survival implications reinforce decentralized storage and barter readiness. Escalation also affects climate control. In extreme heat or cold, mortality risk increases rapidly without heating or air conditioning. The hidden science is thermoregulation. Human core temperature must remain within a narrow band. In heat waves, dehydration accelerates heat stroke. In freezing conditions, hypothermia impairs cognition before unconsciousness. Evidence from historical blackouts shows increased mortality during temperature extremes. Survival implications include passive thermal management strategies, insulation, shading, ventilation control, and layered clothing systems designed for non-powered environments. Transitioning into transportation, modern vehicles contain microelectronics susceptible to voltage surges, though most are somewhat shielded by their metal frames. The greater vulnerability lies in fuel availability rather than engine electronics. Without operational refineries and pumping stations, mobility declines. The misunderstanding is assuming personal vehicle resilience equals mobility resilience. Hidden science in supply chain energy dependency confirms that transportation networks rely on continuous upstream production. Evidence from regional fuel shortages shows rapid depletion when resupply falters. Survival implications favor minimizing travel distance to critical resources and maintaining local support networks. Escalation reaches agricultural production. Industrial farming depends on electrically powered irrigation, refrigeration, processing plants, and distribution networks. Even if crops grow, harvesting and processing at scale require fuel and power. The hidden science involves post-harvest loss rates. Without refrigeration and controlled atmosphere storage, perishable produce deteriorates quickly. Evidence from developing regions without cold chain infrastructure shows loss rates exceeding 30%. Survival implications underscore the importance of shelf-stable foods and preservation skills such as dehydration, fermentation, and canning, all performed with minimal grid reliance. As systemic stress deepens, security concerns emerge. Darkness reduces surveillance and increases opportunity for theft. However, the greater threat is desperation, not organized aggression. The hidden science of behavioral response to scarcity indicates that communities with strong pre-existing social bonds experience lower crime rates during disasters. Evidence from multiple urban blackouts shows that neighborhoods with active local networks maintain order more effectively. Survival implications emphasize community coordination rather than isolation. The transition now turns back to electromagnetic physics, because prevention remains possible at infrastructure and personal scales. Utilities can install series capacitors to block geomagnetically induced currents, deploy real-time monitoring of transformer saturation, and maintain strategic transformer reserves. At the household level, surge protection and selective shielding reduce electronic vulnerability. The misunderstanding is fatalism. While no system is invulnerable, layered mitigation reduces impact magnitude. Escalation is defined by duration. If restoration extends beyond weeks into months, societal adaptation shifts from emergency response to prolonged austerity. Energy consumption patterns change. Migration from dense urban centers may increase. Public health risks accumulate. The hidden science of resilience modeling shows that decentralized energy, diversified food sources, and redundant communication networks dramatically shorten recovery time. And so the question becomes not whether an EMP scale event is possible, but whether your personal infrastructure can operate independently of centralized systems long enough to bridge restoration. Because once a grid collapses, survival is measured not in hours without light, but in days without water, weeks without fuel, and months without coordinated supply. The next phase requires dissecting personal power independence in technical detail, including load calculations, battery sizing, inverter selection, and failure points that most overlook until it is too late.